How about them Cardinals, baby? Let me tell you. Yesterday, 3-0 loss to the Houston Astros.
Yeah, but it's the world champs.
I'm worried about this team now, guys. I'm worried about this club. Jack Flaherty, 4 1/3, 7 hits, a lot of traffic out there, a couple walks. Jack Flaherty, hey, we'll see what happens. Back to you. By the way, that game, 2 hours and 19 minutes.
Like the pace.
That's actually too short for me.
What do you want? What's your sweet spot when it comes to it?
Hockey, I've always said, hockey has the perfect amount of time. The game always ends. Now, if you have, overtime, whatever, but even those aren't long.
You got a couple.
Shootout. It's between 2 hours and 35 minutes and maybe pushing 250.
But you're getting a couple intermissions in there, too, though.
It's got a natural stoppage in terms of going to the bathroom and getting your food with the intermissions.
Okay, that's fair. I get that.
Hockey's perfect. 2 hours, if I'm really devoting a day with my family to go to a park or a stadium, I want at least 2.5 hours. I'm not saying I want 3.5, but 2:45 is a perfect window, and hockey always falls right around there.
So, going back to the Birds, yesterday you saw Brendan Donovan and Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman is top 3 in your lineup that day. Interesting alignment, the kind of alignment that you do want to see in the spring. Boy, that Brendan Donovan keeps on hammering. 2 for 3 yesterday. He's up to 324 this spring. He played shortstop yesterday. With the WBC moving on, you're going to be getting back your everyday shortstop in Tommy Edman back into camp now.
He has returned.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're going to be, you hope you see him in the mix here this weekend. Curious to see how you start to reintegrate guys now that you're going to be getting folks coming back in now and what that means for opportunity and who you keep in camp and who you don't.
So Donovan has been playing shortstop. Our guy, Paul DeJong, has back issues. How serious, we're not sure. But then if he's not there, because if he's healthy, he's going to be your backup shortstop because he got a big contract. Mm-hmm. Also, he's a good glove guy, which is kind of the very least you want from a backup shortstop.
Should be a requirement.
But also, he's got the potential to contribute offensively if he can get right. Now, that's up in the air. I'm not saying he will, but that's the thought process. Now he's out of the mix. So, Brendan Donovan, your backup shortstop. I mean, he hadn't played shortstop much. He's fine there. Mm-hmm. So he can be your backup shortstop, maybe.
So what does that mean, though, for how you break away from camp? Because I think that no matter what happens, in my mind, you're not bringing Mason Wynn to sit the bench.
That's correct.
And to do it that way. So he's not really factoring into what I look at for the immediate shortstop picture. But is there anybody that's lurking around that either fits into the middle infield?
Who could be a backup shortstop, second baseman, utility infielder. Not much bat-wise.
Well, but correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that he got injured and didn't know if he was going to be cleared to be able to break season. So if we're talking about coming north, does this open up a spot for another outfielder instead? Or do you swing it into the staff? Like, what does that look like from an opportunity standpoint this spring?
Well, you got, in terms of guys that can play short, you have Edman, you have Donovan, you have Paul DeJong. And by the way, I like Paul DeJong. I'm rooting for Paul DeJong. But I think I've gotten to the point where I'm past expecting anything. You know what I'm saying? Like we've done now for 2-3 years. Hey, if he finds it, we were told this offseason he redid his swing. We all know why he's on the team because of his contract. So I hope he offers something, but I'm past even expecting it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I mean, what you get is an upside at this point, basically.
Well, but I think it's more than that.
He's making $9 million.
What you get. And I'm not saying that's what you want out of a $9 million investment, but Paul DeJong's healthy as a backup shortstop. You get a guy who can field the position and is plus. I'm not saying he's Gold Glove, but he's a plus defender at shortstop, in my opinion. So you have that at the very least with, which I think what you mean is the potential upside of him finding the stroke again.
Let me ask you this,
It's a lot different than him being your starting shortstop and putting eggs in that basket.
100%. But if they're giving Brendan Donovan these looks at short, and we know a big part of that was Tommy Edman was gone for a week or so at the WBC. But let me ask you this, because a lot of other people come into this conversation, like a Nolan Gorman potentially playing second if somebody else moves over. I'm just asking you folks this right now. when do you ever want to play Paul DeJong? You don't. And I'm saying if you feel like Brendan Donovan can play shortstop, then why would you ever play Paul DeJong this season? Because if you're looking at a rest day, you're looking at matchups lefty-righty, well, then you'd slide over Brendan Donovan to short, you'd play a Nolan Gorman at second base. Well, when would Paul DeJong ever actually play?
So do you think that Paul DeJong being on the roster is actually going to block someone who should be on the roster not making it?
Yeah, probably an outfielder.
But
probably Burleson.
Will it be an outfielder that if you bring Jordan Walker up the way he's playing, that would get any run anyway, especially in a game now where you're not using the pinch hitter as frequently as you would have?
I haven't done roster math, but I'm just saying, like, the only reason, we all know this, the only reason Paul DeJong is on the roster is his contract. All due respect. I'm rooting for him. But do you ever, I'm asking you guys, everybody, do you ever want to play Paul DeJong over switching around some guys and playing a Donovan or a Nolan Gorman? You would never say I want DeJong.
I think the only place where it gets tricky is that if you cross yourself up and you hope it doesn't happen, you have an injury up the middle somewhere. Yeah. And that's where it gets tricky.
But then I bring up, okay, if there's an injury where you now for a couple months, let's say, need someone to play, that's where I bring up Mason Wynn. I don't bring up Mason Wynn to sit the bench at all. But if, let's just say, an Edman or a Donovan got injured and that changes the whole complexion of the middle infield, that's to me when Wynn comes up.
When I look at Brendan Donovan right now, and I'm just looking at depth chart for whatever it's worth on the Cardinals site here, and you'd say doing the math of the other positions, you got two catchers. I think we established the other day that we don't think there will be any more than that'll make the way up. So you've got Goldschmidt, and then Yepes probably is your backup there. I would think that if you had any issues in that space, that would be the turnover. Up the middle, Donovan, Gorman, Edman can still obviously contribute there. You just got a lot of interchangeable pieces up the middle. I guess Donovan's your Gorman's your backup third baseman, I would think.
He played yesterday at third.
Yeah, so he would be the guy there. But then you get into a numbers game in outfield. I don't think you need more than 5 outfielders on this team.
Remember, Donovan can play everywhere.
Sure,
he can play corners.
He's him, and Edman can too if you really need to get into that.
But what do you do? Like if let's say, because Fermin does have a hamstring, so and he's been sent to the minor league camp. DeJong has back issues, which it's a lower back thing. Who knows what that's going to be? So if those guys are out of the mix, okay, Donovan can be backup shortstop, but do you need to carry another infielder to beef up your infield? Or knowing that Donovan can play everywhere there, that Gorman can play second, third, I guess, emergency, play shortstop, not what you want to see, but he can play second and third. He can also play some first base if you need. So do you not have to go out and get or bring up some minor league infielder to give you depth there? Do you just ignore that?
Is it Kramer Robertson?
Could be.
That's the only other option I really see being in play here.
Or go outside and you can find those.
Can Mercado still play the infield?
I don't know.
How dare you?
I don't know.
So he's back in camp. He was in the lineup.
But do you need that?
No, I think it's digging into the absolute bottom thing. We're debating a backup shortstop, but really talking about the validity of what Paul DeJong is supposed to bring to the team. Charlie, I agree. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, and that sometimes people are on the roster because of the payroll, and that's just it.
Matt Carpenter, similar situation. Last couple of years, and we know he bounced back. He was great with the Yankees. You really could not justify Matt Carpenter last couple of years with the Cardinals. You just couldn't. Right. We all know why he was there, because he was making whatever it was, $17 million.
But with DeJong, to me, I get it. You owe him $9 million, want to get something out of it, right?
But it's the last year now too, where
but
if
also
you're hurting
all
your
you
team,
need out of him is to be a guy who can play the position.
But you don't want him to. That's my point. Is
doesn't matter. It's like an insurance that if you need someone to run in and play short, you want more out of every roster spot.
Donovan.
I get that.
I'm just saying, if they feel like Brendan Donovan can be the backup shortstop, then there's really no point of having Paul DeJong on the roster. And I do think he'll break camp with the team. But if he's bad and it's the final year, I could see him getting DFA'd 50 games into the season.
But you think if he's healthy, he will be on the team.
But I don't want to play him.
Okay, but I think what's going to happen is they're going to play him a little bit just to see if there's anything in there. And if there is, they keep him. If not, then they'll move on him.
Do you guys agree with me, though? And I like Paul DeJong. I'm just sell me on any playing time for Paul DeJong right now. And sell me on him playing over Brendan Donovan if you feel like Brendan Donovan can be your backup shortstop. There's just no way.
I don't see it.
Here's the way, honestly, if I'm looking at it from a financial but also a standpoint of trying to win games, early on I would try to find some spots to give him one last shot to see if there's any reason to believe he would give me anything offensively. And if not, then it's almost like looking at an investment in real time to see if there's any reason to hang on to that investment. So that's why I agree. He'll make the team if he's healthy, and I think they will give him not a lot, not key moments, but they'll give him a look because the truth is, if there is anything in there offensively, then he's probably worth hanging on to. It's $9 million. It's not the end of the world for them to absorb that if he can give you something offensively as the backup. You see what I'm saying?
His OPS plus last year was 53. So he's essentially 50% of league average offensively.
Not good.
That's, by the way, we crush our guy Kisner a lot. I think Kisner was maybe 75. We'll look it up. But that's how poor Paul DeJong was offensively last year. We're talking really, really bad. Not a major league caliber player, even close.
In comparison for that, what was Goldschmidt's last year?
OPS plus?
Yes.
I bet you it was 160 or so.
Crazy.
So when you talk about the National League MVP, it's 110 OPS plus separation.
180.
Oh, good God. 130.
I think the comparison, though, to Carpenter offensively is dead on with DeJong because both look like guys who are lost and will never find it again. Carpenter did, right? But
not here.
Look, not here. And maybe the best thing would be for Paul to go somewhere else. But they both look lost, like it's never going to be found. And one guy found it. Can DeJong find it? We'll see. Maybe he'll find it elsewhere. But right now, you understand, at least I do, why they would carry him, because he's a backup and he can field the position, and maybe there's a chance he can find it.
I don't disagree with you, but let's start every conversation with, I think, which is the obvious. The first thing you got to mention is the contract. That's the only reason that we're talking about anything else.
I agree, yes.
If this man did not have a contract, there's no chance of him being on the roster.
I agree, but he does, and he can field. Like, they've had, all right, put it this way. Teams have carried guys who can field and as backup infielders before, a ton of them. None of them had $9 million contracts because they wouldn't be there if they did. They'd find a cheaper option that was limited in what they could bring to the team. So I totally get it. But I'm saying you take the money out of it and you have a guy who can field the position but can't hit. Not ideal, but it happens.
Don't you think, though, and let's have a debate, don't you think this year's Cardinals team, from a position player standpoint, it's not the type of team that needs an Aaron Miles, that needs a Daniel Descalso? And I'm saying that because they're freaking good and they're deep. And they have a lot of dudes who aren't backup types. Like all these guys, if on day one you have to sit Dylan Carlson or Lars Nootbaar, that shows you how deep. Like your bench is going to be Kisner because he's a backup backup catcher.
That'd be something.
Juan Yepes, probably. Burleson might not even make the team, but I'm saying you're going to be sitting dudes who are good. You don't really even have a spot for that old school backup infielder that's not very good.
Here's what when you look at it, you just do the math. I'll do the numbers game. You're going to carry 26 players on your roster. And say you go 13-13 between your pitchers and your everyday guys. At least four. You take your starters. Edmund, Goldschmidt, Arenado, Contreras, Nootbaar, Donovan. They're in there. You're making the decision about your outfield, what that's going to be comprised of. But then on the bench, let's just say you start O'Neill, Carlson, Nootbaar, and Walker. All right? So that leaves your outfield as being your bench as being Kisner, Yepes, Gorman, and DeJong. So you got 4 spots. You need to have another infielder in there, or maybe you don't. Here's what the Cardinals don't need.
That's, to me, the question.
Yeah, you don't. Here's the thing. Maybe the Cardinals don't need another person that needs to have at bats to stay sharp and relevant because you need their bat to be ready. What the Cardinals may be best served by doing is having somebody who said, bring your glove. If you need your bat, that's fine. Because you're already going to be scrapping for bats for Yepez and for Gorman and definitely Walker if you break camp with him. So what you've got to do is figure out what the fit is and what it really needs to be. And maybe that's what DeJong is. He's just a $9 million guy that brings a glove, and if the at-bat happens, it happens.
Here's what I'd say about that. If the Cardinals don't feel comfortable with Brendan Donovan being the backup shortstop, I totally understand Paul DeJong being on the roster. And we all know it's because of the contract first and foremost. But if the Cardinals feel like Brendan Donovan is a capable backup shortstop, then there's really no need for Paul DeJong at all. Now, if there's an injury, it's a different conversation.
See, to me, and I understand both points of view, so to me being in the middle of those two would be, if he's healthy, you break camp with DeJong, and you give him a few looks, and then you decide if he's not going to find it, then you make your move. Because you don't have to do anything right now or early on. Early on, you're still feeling out what guys go where. So I would do that. I would give it the eye test early on in the season and then make my move based on what I'm seeing there.
Right, and they probably will. That's where...
And I think that's prudent.
Yeah, they're going to give DeJong a couple months. They'll probably end up DFAing him. Remember, Donovan last year, looking up, played 7 games at short, started 6, played a total of 56 innings. If you have a backup shortstop, you probably want that guy to play at least 20, 25 games at short, don't you think?
Yeah.
So maybe they don't feel like Brendan Donovan is that guy. He's just kind of the emergency shortstop.
Trust me.
I don't know.
I think they're looking him over every play he makes at shortstop at spring training. But, yes, there's an emergency element because the starter's away and the other guy's hurt. But like I said, and you'll get killed. Like if DeJong is healthy and makes the team, Cardinal fans will be in an uproar and they'll point out Matt Carpenter and everything. I honestly think, in fairness, that's the prudent way to handle it because you just want to make sure what you have and what you don't have.
Nate, what do you think?
You know, I read the headline in the paper yesterday, and I took issue with the fact that DeJong's injury was called a conundrum. I mean, I just don't know what sort of reality these people are living in when they talk about DeJong being a conundrum for the Cardinals. DeJong is literally probably one of the last players on the roster, okay? The Cardinals feel competent with Brendan Donovan backing up your starting shortstop, Tommy Edman. He played short yesterday. He played short several times a year ago. It's not like you're going to have a backup shortstop starting 40 times. And if it does become an issue, you've got plenty of depth. And I think we just learned that Mason Wynn looks more major league ready than we ever anticipated when we started spring training. And I will certainly eat crow on that because I had no idea. But he looks good.
I'm so happy. That's my happy birthday, Matt.
Yes.
Happy birthday, Nate.
Well, we share a birthday, so. Yeah.
But
here's
you
the
guys.
thing.
But here's where I think I'm not saying it's a conundrum because I actually agree with you. Because you have a guy, Donovan can play short, but what if they want to use him pretty much as your regular second baseman?
Well, that's fine, but if you have a problem with Edman, if he gets hurt, Nolan Gorman can play second base, and Donovan plays short. I mean, Nolan Gorman's going to get more than 400 at-bats this year. They're going to work him in. He's played some third base in spring. He's obviously been at second base. You know, I think they feel comfortable moving him around at both of those positions and getting spots at the DH role. So Gorman's going to be in the lineup a lot, and I think you definitely want Donovan in there. And I just don't think it's that big of a concern. And the other element about his contract is I would be more concerned if the Cardinals, sent him down to Memphis last year for a week or week and a half, and then they immediately brought him back up, right? Remember how they did that with Colton Wong? Colton Wong had his jersey day, and they say, "Oh, we gotta get Colton Wong back up here in the lineup."
Bader too,
but he didn't even deserve to be brought up. Like he didn't deserve to be brought up, but he did. Paul DeJong spent 60 games in the minor leagues last year. 60 games. That's not a small sample size. So to me, that tells me that the organization is where they're at with Paul DeJong. And if he's healthy, there's a likely chance that he's going to be the 26th man on the roster. But at this case, I don't think it's a conundrum whatsoever. I think you've got plenty of infielders to go around, and in a short term, Brendan Donovan definitely can handle the rigors of shortstop.
I think we're all on the same page. But if he's healthy, would you be up in arms if Paul DeJong were on the roster heading back to St. Louis?
No, because in the DH era, I just don't think that the depth of your bench isn't necessarily as big of a issue as it once was.
I'm more concerned about if you have these guys that you need to get at bats, like a Gorman, like a Walker, like all the guys that you really have you want to project and see how they fit into the big picture. Paul DeJong is I look at him almost like a backup catcher at this point.
I agree, and so I don't. But I guarantee people will be furious if he's on the roster, if he's healthy, because he got the back thing. But I think the smart thing is, he's an overpriced, at this point, backup shortstop who can field the position. And you look at him, and then you decide whether it's prudent to give that spot to someone else who you think you're going to get more of. Look, Mason Wynn has already won me over. He's a major leaguer. I would be hesitant to bring him up early in the season or now based on an injury to Paul DeJong or something like that. I think let him get a little bit more seasoning in the minors, and hopefully we'll see him sometime this year.
And by the way, Paul DeJong's roster spot, if you just looked at a world where Paul DeJong didn't exist and he wasn't in the conversation, probably Alec Burleson is on the roster. Now, Alec Burleson isn't hitting either, so he's not making this a tougher decision for the Cardinals. But so Paul DeJong will be on the roster, I think we all agree, even if you don't like it. If he's healthy to start the season because of the contract. But if he was not in the equation, it's probably Burleson, who's just a depth outfielder, pinch hit, DH guy.
And Burleson is the exact example of why I wanted the Cardinals to go out and bring in someone else who can serve that role as kind of a reserve bat if you need it. I think Dickerson served that role last year, pretty well, and had a stretch where he was contributing and doing that. And he's a veteran that's used to that. Listen, I don't want Alec Burleson riding the bench doing that. If he's not going to play, have him in Memphis getting the at bats that he needs. I think that camp has evolved to a point where it's made it pretty easy for this decision about what the everyday component of the roster is going to be. If you're going to bring in Mason Wynn, has proven it. He's done what he needed to do. I think it's a successful camp for Mason Wynn. Keep growing in Memphis and see what happens there. And now you've just got to decide that, you don't need that extra bat because it's only going to play maybe, once a week at most? And that shouldn't be a guy who's 22. That should be a guy who's 32.
And Burleson is not forcing himself into the lineup. The way Jordan Walker, you could have made the case coming in. Look, if Alec Burleson's numbers were Jordan Walker's and Jordan Walker's numbers were Alec Burleson's right now, then everybody would be saying, hey, Burleson has to be on this team. Jordan Walker, we still love him, but he's struggling a bit. Go down to Memphis, and you'll come back soon.
I'll say this. It's the 17th. We're getting closer to the window. We're running out of time to say, there's still time to decide it. I don't think there's any tough decisions about what the Cardinals' everyday roster needs to look like. You just need to get to the point where you understand Jordan Walker is going to be a part of it and start setting that up to be the case. Because after that, there's nobody else pushing their way onto the roster that you didn't plan to be there already.
I think definitely, and our conversation here is about position players. I think the bullpen, you got some interesting questions, but I agree with you.
Yes. As far as the everyday component, I don't feel anything there. I think the bullpen is completely different.